With the Echoes episode completely taken care of after the second and third act have been completed, I decided to actually do a review for both of them at the same time, just so that it makes it a little bit easier, and it's also a better showing of what was added in each of the acts and compare them to what Act 1 was. So when it comes to the story, Act 2 has primarily been decent when it came to the development of the story. It actually got better compared to what I was expecting, especially since at that point we actually had the bit of the reveal of it being Maya Sundaresh being the reason for everything going on Nessus and being the conductor themselves. And if you don't know who that is, it was a scientist who studied the Veil back in Neomuna, and if you Lightfall, you'll also be able to have a bit of a storyline that went on beyond the actual main expansion that kind of went into how the study was going with through Geomessi's eyes and dealing with how Maya kind of lost herself within. Now, when it became everything in that, it was nice that it did ramp up in Act 2, but the problem is that it should have happened earlier. I feel like the fact that this was all given to us on the final week of Act 2 doesn't really give me much of a lasting like, oh my god, it just seems like it's a good old cliffhanger and that's it. And because there's only 2 weeks prior of providing any kind of context, there really isn't much there to kind of make it impactful as they were kind of hoping for. Now, again, that whole aspect of it means that there's no investment into that. Like, oh, cool, it's Maya. All right, great, I'm glad. Now we know who it is. But I still don't really give a shit. Like, no lie, this was just kind of a bad way of doing it, in my opinion. But, if you decide to cut everything up into 3 acts and then have it be 3 weeks of story, 3 weeks of nothing, and then 3 weeks of story, it's bound to happen where you just have this massive lack of investment that comes from me and possibly from other people as well. Now, moving on to Act 3 in terms of the story, it does help a little bit about figuring out the reason for Maya's ambitions for a new golden age, and her start of it was to try and find her version of Geomessi. Now, we find out obviously that because she was so absorbed in her work, she incidentally killed off her version of Geomessi after we kind of go through and figure this out. And then we confront Maya with Ikora and Say14 at the end to stop her, and then, she just escapes, and that's that. And so, yeah, you can tell how kind of like meh that is, because it's pretty bad. It's just very dry and kind of all over the place if you really look at every single act. Because Act 1 was just like a relationship therapy session between Saint 14 and Osiris, which is fine. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm fine with them having, more development within the relationship. That's cool. But then it just somehow cuts into something completely different where it's like Saint 14 is trying to find himself. And then all of a sudden, Act 3 is just, we're fighting Maya. And I'm like, what? Why? Why is it so disjointed? Like, you can kind of see the connection between Act 1 and Act 2. You can barely see the connection between Act 2 and Act 3. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just like, oh, therapy, and then self-actualization type deal, or, whatever you would want to kind of spin that. But in between Act 2 and Act 3, it's like, reveal, and then fight. Okay, I mean, not gonna say that it's like not a bad story. It would have been kind of cool to see it more fleshed out for Act 3, just because it's like, ooh, I'm actually very curious about it. Because again, we also went through in talking about the entire information that we got from the, Lightfall, going through the audio logs with Geomessi and kind of getting that information, and then we can compare it to here, how it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of the aftermath. But here, it just feels like, okay, here's 3 weeks, okay, she's gone by, done. Like, that's it. There isn't really anything else. Like, it just doesn't feel like we have anything coherent, and again, this whole disjointed of 3 weeks after 3 weeks of story means that you're not 100% invested. It just feels really off, and then it just feels like you're looking at completely different storylines that were all kind of half-assed in my eyes. And it's just like, it's not a good setup, especially if you're trying to be someone who is trying to continue on from the final shape where they had their massive grand finale. This is not a way to kind of continue that off, because it just does not feel like we're following the kind of the same flow for even just the episode itself, whatever they're trying to set up in the background. It's just really, I don't like it. It's just bad. I think it's just meh, and there isn't anything that's worth really investing into. It's just, okay, storyline, cool, whatever, blah, done. And that's it. So, I'm not happy about this. I don't know if anyone else really enjoyed this. And honestly, I kind of wish we had more to come out of it instead of just like, hey, 3 weeks and then, we're done. Just kind of seems like a letdown for us. Now, we can move on to the activities that both of the acts kind of provided. So obviously within Act 2, we first got the 3 battleground areas, or technically strikes, because let's face it, it's likely at a later date these are just going to be tossed in the Vanguard ops, because that's what happens to all of the battleground, strikes eventually. But I did like them though. They had a really nice atmosphere. It was really cool to kind of go through them, and also they were kind of short. They did feel like strikes, so it wasn't too much of an issue. And also it does kind of work with each other. So it's like the first week, the second week, and the third week you go in through that flow. Now obviously that was made for specifically the story beats of those weeks, but it still feels nice that it was a good flow between them. It wasn't just like, oh, we're here, and then, okay, we're over there, and okay, we're in a different completely area. You start off where you end off on the last one, which is really nice, and I like that. I don't mind that. I do wish, though, that even though these work on its own, I kind of wish you had more within there. Because again, you finish in like, what, maybe 10-15 minutes, which isn't really that long, and that's only if you're doing it at a slower rate. If you're just trying to kind of go and blitz through, you can get that done in like, what, maybe 8-9 minutes if you're on point. Maybe the last one may take you a little bit longer, but not by much. And so it's kind of kind of wish we had more, but I mean, there's still some aspects that are good. So other than the actual like strike itself, you do get resource deposits that you can use a hammer on, so you can kind of gain that bonus. And even though it may not be as much as you would get from the normal arenas that came out in Act 1, at least within these strikes they're in a linear pattern, so it's not like you have to go off, run to a different location, and try and collect them as fast as you can before either you or your random teammate will just teleport you into the boss fight. It's all there, everyone can easily grab it, and it's not out of the way for much, which is not too bad. I think that's really nice. But, again, some of the positives in this doesn't really cover the negative aspects of it as much. So it's one of those things that kind of does give a decent way to grind gear, as well as to also kind of grind like resources. So it's not a huge issue. I think this may be a better way of doing it instead of the arenas, which does, again, it kind of has its benefits, but also its downsides, because one, you're having to run through it over and over and over again, and you can easily get sick of it, especially since it's just primarily focused around the story. So you're just kind of running through over and over and over with very little variation in terms of the storyline, audio, and also the boss fights themselves. Because again, it's just a normal strike. Now, Act 3 did bring in the exotic mission of Encore. Now, first things first, the exotic mission, I love the look of it. I've always been a fan of the Vex architecture. I love the landscape. I love how the machine look of the structures work within the actual of the nature of everything. The radiolaria showing off as waterfalls and rivers, kind of giving this nice synthetic nature-esque look. And I really enjoyed that very much. It has really cool background. Like, you can look in the distance, you have a massive pyramid there. You can also see massive cliffs that you're running through. And then on top of that, you also have a really cool mechanic where you're just essentially like unlocking paths, creating bridges, and also enabling portals throughout the missions using certain buffs, which is cool. I think that's awesome, and I think that those type of situations where it kind of brings in some additional attitudes and different, like, you know, things other than just let's just run through, kill stuff, go to a next area, and then kill stuff more, it does kind of bring a little bit more of a dynamic look into it, and it actually feels like, hey, look, I'm actually doing something instead of just, well, I'm just running around killing shit, woohoo! Because, let's face it, as much as I love the Whisper mission, it does kind of get boring once you kind of go through and, like, you just killing everything. Now, with that, there's also the aspect of it being a, you know, same thing as the Battlegrounds. You do get those hammer points where you are able to collect resources, and just like in the Battlegrounds as well, there are two, and they're in a linear path, so you will not be able to miss them, and you'll be able to gain a little bit more, especially since within the second area it's in a more broader location, so it does kind of give you a little bit of a benefit for going through there. Now, of course, the mission itself does have an expert mode, however, you would only want to do that after you've completed the first time, so you can get the acquire one exotic, and then you would be able to go and grab the catalyst. The nice part is, you only really have to do it once if you only care for the catalyst, because the other ones were able to be processed and collected without having to go through it more than once on expert. So, you only really need to do expert once just to get the catalyst started, and then after that you would be able to do it without the expert mode for the rest of the time, which is nice, although I think it could be something that was a glitch and they may patch it out by the time this video comes out. I don't know, but yeah, that's something that kind of comes up. Now, a cool aspect of it is there is a Whisper trial, so essentially, you would need to do it on expert. It's only available on expert. You would need to enable it by going through a portal, and then you will have 25 minutes to beat the entire mission on expert from the beginning all the way to the end, which is nice because they do respawn you at the beginning, so you don't have to go all the way back up from where you enabled it. But once you get there, and you understand the patterns and everything, it is fairly straightforward. I think, we were able to get it done with a decent amount of time to spare, give or take here or there. But, again, it's a really cool idea to have, especially since we haven't had one of those for a while. I think, the last time we had anything that had to do with speed was back when 0 Hour first came out, back in Joker's Wild. And so, you know, we actually are getting some cool stuff. And I do like the fact that they're doing this. Now, we're done with all the positive aspects of it. Let's go over the other aspects that really does not rub me the right way. So, unlike in previous times where they just released the exotic mission and it's something you can do on your own and doesn't have anything to really do with the story, you have to do it for the story, which is not something that I like, because the one aspect is that, one, there's only one straight line. There isn't any variance into it other than collecting the catalyst and maybe diverting to get like the secret chest here or there. Outside of that, there isn't anything that's so big for you to go through, but again, you're just going through it for the storyline, for the dialogue, and it does update each week. But again, it's still just the fact that you're going through it once a week for 3 weeks just to complete the story. Now, it is convenient as well, since you are able to also get all of the exotic catalysts and everything per week, but it's still just the aspect of going through that on the purpose of the story. To do the story is not something that I particularly am a fan of, because if you have to do it multiple times over and over and over again, you start to get sick of it, especially since it really doesn't feel like there is much to add within there. I mean, like, hell,
think half the time, if you are able to just get the catalyst, you would just go into orbit. But in this case, like, you have to finish the whole thing to proceed, which is kind of a letdown compared to what we had beforehand, where you're able to do the mission at your own leisure and you didn't have to go through over and over and over again, back to back to back. Now again, yeah, there is still that 3-week break that we get, that, there's always that aspect into it. But again, it doesn't change it doesn't like move away from the fact that it's like, you have to get the exotic mission to do the storyline. Which sucks, because in that case, you would need to complete the previous act to get access to the exotic mission, which is dumb. Because if someone doesn't care for the story but really wants to get Choir of One, they are forced to do the entire storyline, which, yeah, may take them about like 5 or 6 hours, but again, that's 5 or 6 hours of unnecessary, gameplay that they don't care about. They don't want to do it. They want to get into the grinding immediately. They want to go for the exotic. They want to go for the catalyst. And so I'm not a fan of that. I think it's kind of stupid when it comes to those type of situations. Leave the exotic missions to their own devices. You can have a mini storyline within them and have it be connected to the weapon itself, but don't have it as part of the main storyline for the episode, because again, it just doesn't make sense, especially when we had all this aspect beforehand. Now, looking at the actual gun itself, Choir 1 is fun to use. Don't get me wrong, it's a great exotic. Definitely get your hands on it. I know they're going to be like nerfing it a little bit just because it was kind of insane, but it's still pretty fun to use, even if it does get a bit of a nerf. Because one, you essentially can take the fight to the Wyverns right back at them with their own stuff, which is always just great. And personally for me, the fact that I'm able to put on destabilizing rounds for the catalyst does make it so much better. And it will make it more of an easier time to kind of make a build with it, so you can take more advantage of utilizing volatile rounds and other aspects connected to it. Now, again, that's kind of all like the main aspects that I do enjoy, but overall, as much as it is a great mission, the fact that you have to do it for the story doesn't really, give you a lot of enjoyment out of it. And after doing it like 5 times, you get sick of it. But then again, that's kind of what happens with exotic missions in general. Now, if we look at kind of everything, and I mean that's including Act 1, 2, and 3, it doesn't look good. I'll admit, this is not their best idea. Because essentially this episode that takes, almost a third of the year, because again, this started back in June, and we're just about to finish it in October, but we had, maybe a couple of weeks more of storyline. We had time-gated information and time-gated gear, time-gated activities. The exotic mission came out later than normal. There's so much stuff within there that this is just like a repackaged season. But again, you have those forced delays, like, oh, you can't do this because we're still in Act 1, even though this has been like done since day 1, and I got sick of it, and I don't want to do it anymore. I want to check out the new stuff, but I can't get to the new stuff because guess what? It's not available for me. And I know it's there, but I can't access it, and I don't like that. I think that's dumb. Especially since, again, compared to the previous seasons where it's like, oh, you had the arenas, but then you also had the battlegrounds there, and that's available. And then the storyline, you were able to go through week by week and not have this 3-week break compared to what we had previously, which is, 7 weeks of story, but at least those 7 weeks were back to back to back to back to back, the full 7, and not just 3 weeks here, 3-week break, 3 weeks here, 3-week break, 3 weeks here, then 3 weeks, and then the end of the episode itself. And I don't like that. I think it's kind of dumb if you're having it set up that way, because again, you have stuff that is time-gated, you have story missions that are already delayed, on top of the normal weekly time-gated stuff, and the fact that you're trying to kind of give a motivation to Destiny 2 players after the conclusion of the final shape, this is not
the way to do it. I think this is possibly the worst method of trying to continue the actual, like, following up storylines that you could have had. Because at least if we look at, you know, what happened after Witch Queen, what happened after Lightfall, after Shadowkeep, at least those somewhat kind of worked. Granted, obviously, the worst one out of them was the Shadowkeep, but that was just because everything was just disjointed in general, which I think is fine, because at least at that point we were able to gain access to everything, and then also we had access to grind all the weapons just straight up. There wasn't any delays, like I didn't have to wait 6 weeks to grind for, you know, the solar rocket pistol. And then on top of that, you get, like, the perfect paradox. Hey, guess what? You have to wait, 12 weeks for that. Which I find stupid. I find it ridiculous. I find it dumb. I don't think it should be like that. And the fact that we don't have access to all these weapons at the start does not make it more enjoyable, because it's like, okay, great, I have to wait for this long. I don't want to play it right now. But, you know, it is what it is. And overall, like, there again, the lack of motivation that I have to kind of continue the story is still present. Now, obviously, again, there's a lot of things that have come out since, you know, the end of the act, which kind of made a little bit of a more excitement, kind of intrigued me a little bit. But again, I'm not going to be talking about those. I'm just focusing on the act. If you're not keeping an eye on all the other stuff that they're bringing out, all the development stuff that they're doing, and everything else, if you just look at it like, okay, this is the episode for Echoes, and that's that, you will not have a fun time in seeing any motivation and figuring out where you would want to go from there. It's just, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. It's not fun. And it goes all those aspects where it's just like, yeah, here you go, you can do all this stuff, but it just doesn't feel like what I'm used to, what I want to do. Now, if I were to give this a score, I think that this will be a 4 out of 10. Just to kind of reiterate everything, the story felt disjointed. There was so much stuff that was time-gated, and the activities that were time-gated really didn't add much other than other means to farm up resources and weapons and armor themselves. And on top of that, a lot of it was just primarily just based off of the story and then kind of just recycled later on for other uses. So it's not as fun as it would have been, and also, again, that lack of cohesion when it comes to the story really didn't help motivate me to kind of anticipate, like, what to, like, you know, to actually be able to be like, oh, what's going on? It doesn't have that feeling as I used to. Now, again, recently, before this video has gone up, they did talk about a bunch of changes that they have made for Revenant. They have also added a bunch of stuff that's happening, like actually bringing the Garden of Salvation's loot pool, doing a refresh of that, and then also having a contest mode for the upcoming dungeon in Revenant, which is nice. And the fact that this episode being potentially one of the worst ones that they have ever done, or at least in terms of seasonal content, they can really only go up from here, because if they can somehow make the bar even lower, I would be very much impressed. Alright, now that we're at the end of the video, thank you guys for watching. This was supposed to come out like a couple of weeks ago, but the fact that this episode was just not fun and left such a bitter taste, it actually took me like a decent amount of time to somewhat rationalize my thoughts about this, just because, one, I would have flamed this entire thing. I would have just flamed it all to hell, and 90% of this video would have just been me roasting it, how bad it was, and etc., etc. There wasn't any positive aspects that would have been shown in this. But also, another thing that I kind of did want to also let you guys know is that for future episode reviews, starting actually with Revenant that's going to be upcoming, We're actually going to have it where instead of having, 2 videos where it's just Act 1 and then Act 2 and 3, we'll just have it all into one video just so that we can actually have it, 1, compressed down, and 2, a lot less work for me to have to worry about, especially since I am working on like a bunch of other games and kind of going through those. So it should make it a little bit more easy for me to actually do everything that I want to do and, actually kind of get more stuff out on this channel other than just Destiny review, Destiny review, Destiny review. So we'll have to see on that part. But regardless of what I've been rambling on about, hopefully you guys have enjoyed watching. Do leave it a like, share it with your friends, and also subscribe to see more reviews from me. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next review. Take care.